You're 35 years old and you still ask your mom if it's okay to dye your hair. Or maybe you've been dreaming of starting that business for 3 years, but you're waiting for someone to tell you that's a good idea. What if I told you that most of the permission you're waiting for doesn't actually exist, and the person who needs to sign your permission slip is you? We're exploring the invisible contracts we've signed with other people's expectations, sharing stories of people who finally gave themselves permission to live differently, and uncovering why that little voice asking, "Am I allowed?" might be the biggest thing standing between you and the life you actually want. Ava, she has to get permission to go to the bathroom or something in first grade.
I hope not.
Well, she has to.
Oh, in school.
In school, yeah.
School.
Well, at home, okay. Let me rephrase this. At home, my daughters are able to go to the bathroom whenever they want to, but when they're in school, they got to get that permission slip to go to the bathroom or to get an early out,
Yeah.
or something like that. It kind of seems like that we're just always feels like I have to ask for permission a lot.
We kind of live in we're conditioned to ask permission. Let's put it that way. When you think about it, don't you think?
Why do you think we're conditioned for that?
Well, we've grown up with it.
Right.
So much is learned through observation, and conditioned, meaning all the conditioned responses are just something that we've learned over time by watching others, for example.
Right.
When you're young, you need permission to go outside. You need permission to stay up late. You need permission to, I don't know, sleep in maybe. And then you go to school and you need permission to leave the classroom, like you said, to use the restroom or do whatever else you need. So you always need permission for things. And I think we kind of carry that over into our adult lives.
This may be something a little bit off topic, but I was watching another podcast about just like all these different surveys and research things that people do. And there was one about confirmation bias. Basically, where like a whole group of people were answering questions like a multiple choice question, and one person, all of them were in on this test, and there's only one person that they were doing the experiment on.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone who was involved in this test, they intentionally chose the obviously wrong answer. Yeah. And the guy that they were doing the test on, it was like 75% of the time they would intentionally go along with the crowd and choose the wrong answer.
Yeah. Well, confirmation bias is we tend to look for evidence that justifies our point of view or our thoughts about something.
Yeah.
So the funny thing about that is you can not manipulate anything, but whenever you make a decision, your brain's going to automatically look for things to confirm that what you said or did or chose is correct. And so the confirmation bias causes your brain to look for information that confirms, so to speak, what it's thinking or what it's already done. And so our brain's very good at tuning out everything else.
Right.
It's focusing on that information that confirms the choice you already made. So that's the confirmation.
It's interesting.
Bias. Yeah.
I guess that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the permission slip.
Well, it kind of does.
Does it?
We kind of seek evidence to justify what we're going to do. And we've talked before, we've touched on it that, our brains are designed to keep us safe. Mm-hmm. And so our brains are always looking for information or data from the environment that'll keep us safe. And so what it'll do is it'll find information to prevent you from doing something. And so it's not that a choice is necessarily a life or death situation, but that's kind of how our primitive brains function. It seeks to keep us at a place of equilibrium. It keep things the same because we don't like change. And so what does that mean with our daily choices? Well, it means we tend to be able to find reasons for not doing something rather than reasons to do something. And that's kind of where I was leading when we talk about permission slips.
Sure.
If you think about, the kids needing permission to leave class in school. We're all used to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's common. Although in today's day and age, we use digital permission slips. Just this year,
What?
in my kids' school district, they approved a digital permission slip process, and so all the permission slips to leave class are done digitally. And so they send a request to the teacher from their laptop. The teacher approves it, and they can up and leave. So no more
Well,
paper.
oh my
Paperless society.
gosh, no more.
Yeah.
Oh,
No more permission slips. No more faking them anymore
they're
either.
not. Yeah, I guess you can't. Yeah, you can't have mom or dad write on them or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. But so the thing
Poor
is,
kids.
a kid needs a permission slip to leave class, whether it's digital or paper.
Mm-hmm.
What about adults that need permission to live differently? I think a lot of times as adults, at least speaking from personal experience, and the research shows that we get paralyzed by analyzing all the different options. And so a lot of times we wait for permission before we actually take a step
Mm-hmm.
forward. And that prevents us from really taking small steps towards our goals or towards what we want to achieve in life.
Right.
And so really what what we're talking about today is about unlearning those internal cues and then having what I call quietly radical choices.
Quietly radical choices.
Quietly radical, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's just going against the grain. It's being willing to do the hard things. When you look at someone that's considered a radical or whatever, they're kind of on the fringe. They
Mhm.
kind of do things that not everybody else would do. Maybe they have extreme beliefs or whatever. And I'm not saying that we have extreme beliefs, but really when you're making radical choices that nobody sees, they're small choices that go a long way towards really changing your life and changing the trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked before about, I believe, that our choices stack up on top of each other, and every decision you make has an effect on you. So if you accumulate bad decisions over time, you're going to get a bad result. Whereas if you accumulate good decisions over time, it's much different. So
you have the compound effect.
yeah, kind of the compound effect or the compound interest on your decisions.
Oh, yeah, that's good. That's a good way to look
Well,
at it.
while a small decision on a given day may seem really tiny and insignificant, over time, those choices, those decisions, those actions will stack up and then produce something much greater.
Right.
There's also this idea of like the invisible contract that I call, when I work with people in individual and counseling and therapy and whatnot, there's this idea of an individual or an invisible contract, I call it. And that's really how we inherit, our rules and roles within our family and our culture and our profession. And what it is just these unspoken rules, or this idea of internalized authority that reinforce these different concepts that we have that prevents us from making decisions.
Sure.
You're probably wondering what the heck I mean.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? I'm not following that very well.
We each have a conscience on the inside that tells us right from wrong.
Right.
That's kind of innate to all of us.
Yeah.
Someone that gives you the red flag, hey, something's not quite right here. There's that, but there's also this idea of internalized authority that we acquire through our environment, through growing up. And we don't really know why it's there. Meaning, like each of us, we're not consciously aware of it, but it's this internalized authority or this invisible contract that we have that kind of drives our decisions and impacts our decision making.
Sure.
For our own lives. So let's just kind of talk about a couple of different concepts. That we bring up. The first one is called introjection. Okay. Do you have any idea what introjection is, John?
Josh,
You don't have to say no.
I can tell you it is a, well, I'm just going to let you explain it. I have the notes here. I'm not going to pretend to know it.
So introjection
is a psychoanalysis.
It's a psychoanalytic term, yeah.
See,
Sigmund Freud.
Can't even get it right.
Yeah, Sigmund Freud actually came up with it. And again, you can think what you want about Freud. He was a little off his rocker, but a couple of his
little doofus
ideas kind of stick. And the first one, this is introjection. What does that mean? It means that we unconsciously adopt the beliefs, values, and attitudes or feelings of others. Okay. And then we integrate them into our own internal sense of self as if they were our own. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So we've acquired these ideas and these beliefs from others, but then they become a part of our personality, become a part of our belief system, become a part of our internal psyche, so to speak. that we assume that they're our own. Okay.
Oh, sure.
And so do you see kind of the difference between it's a value that you've acquired, for example, rather than one that you've arrived at on your own?
Right. Okay.
Or it's a rule that you've acquired rather than one that you've arrived at on your own.
How that's got to be far more common than coming up with your own values, your own the contract that you make on your own for yourself. That's truly your own, because we're so influenced by family, friends, and our environment.
Oh yeah, we are our family and our friends and our environments, right? And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but it's also important to note that all that kind of impacts how we think about things and how we make decisions currently. So it kind of complicates factors by when we're feeling internal resistance to making a decision, or we're feeling that we don't have permission, so to speak, to do things.
Right. I hear you.
That's preventing us from working towards our goals or doing something that we want to do. The question we can ask ourselves is that really because I have an issue with it, or is it because there's some kind of unspoken rule that I've acquired over time
Interesting.
that's preventing me from doing it? You know, it's helpful to kind of look at really extreme circumstances to kind of understand how it works. So if you look at someone that was in a cult, so to speak, they acquire these extreme rules to abide by.
Right.
And outsiders looking into a cult, for example, be like, how the heck can somebody that is supposedly has a free will, that thinks freely, that essentially chose to be in there, how is it possible for these cult leaders to exert so much control over them? And what's really fascinating is really this is kind of what's going on is there's this process of introjection that occurs in which the people in that cult, they adapt the beliefs, the values, the attitudes, and the feelings of these cult leaders, and then makes them as if they were their own. Once you've integrated something, it's one thing to have something outside yourself, right?
Right.
That you're ascribing to. That's different than if you've integrated it and had it become a part of your core. You know, once something becomes a part of your core, that's when it becomes very, very powerful. And then the cult leader's job is really done. They don't need to work that hard anymore because they've gotten their followers to integrate completely.
That's amazing.
It is very fascinating. Now, I'm not saying that we're all victims of a cult and brainwashing, but it's just kind of look at an extreme case and kind of understand this concept of introjection.
Sure.
And so you and I, you know, we've all of us have grown up in some kind of family structure, whether it's a great family structure or not a great one. But because of that, we've unconsciously adopted these beliefs and so forth.
Sure.
That aren't necessarily ours, but we've integrated them as if they were our own.
Right.
That's different for every one of us. So that's kind of introjection. Does that kind of make sense?
I find that so interesting that that they can be so influenced to consciously make these decisions that are clearly bad for them.
Right.
But yet, because of the introjection, they're willing to drink the Kool-Aid. Yeah. Literally.
Well, so that's where we get the cliche from, drinking Kool-Aid, right?
Right. That just blows my mind. They knew that this was going to be I think they thought that they were going to be this is I'm talking about Jonestown, right? This is Jonestown?
Yeah, Jonestown.
Yeah. They thought that they were going to be reincarnated or something. I don't know. But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to misconstrue what happened with that tragedy. But it was something they
horrible.
They believe they were under attack or something.
Oh, that's what it was. That's what it was.
So yeah, it's a fascinating, and the reason introjection happens, or the reason we internalize these things, is because our brain is looking for, one, it's always looking to adapt to keep itself safe, and two, it's always looking for acceptance. And
acceptance, there you go.
Because we're herd animals, right? We're herd creatures.
Sure are.
You know, we look for, we don't function very well on our own, so our brain's always looking for ways to connect. So that's introjection. That kind of contributes to our invisible contract, so to speak, that we have with ourselves.
Sure.
The other one is the flip side of that is this idea of cognitive distortions. And most of us know what that is. Cognitive distortions is kind of a pop psychology thing, but it has its roots in cognitive behavior therapy. But a cognitive distortion is something that essentially says, I can't do something because of this. And it's similar to the confirmation bias from the standpoint that our brain looks for ways to prevent you from doing something. And so it'll look for evidence that'll prevent you from taking that step of uncertainty, so to speak.
Right.
What does that look like? A kind of distortion essentially distorts reality to make it look as if something that it's not. So if we distort reality enough, that makes causes something to look dangerous or unsafe or unsure or unpredictable. The brain will use that information. Our brain will use that information to stop us essentially from, I should say, we will use that information to stop us from doing something.
Sure.
Oh, I can't do that because, writing the first paragraph of my book, it's not going to mean anything, and I'm never going to be able to get the whole thing done.
Can't start because it's the right paper.
Yeah, exactly. It's just
the right tools.
Exactly.
Just
don't have the right notebook. Yeah.
Right.
It's just kind of a distortion of reality. So if you look at things like, and again, to kind of keep people on track, we're talking about that internalized authority piece. And so you have that introjection, which is where we internalize the values, the beliefs, the expectations of others into our core. Then we have cognitive distortions that kind of reinforce that, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we look at, the cost of waiting, which is energy spent asking, am I allowed to do this? Rather than just, as you said a few seconds ago, just go do it.
How can people determine if something that they're doing, that their contract is an introjection, or if it's like their personal value? Like, how is there like a litmus test or whatever?
Well, I think,
like, is this really my decision, or am I allowing another person or a group of people to make that decision for me?
I think the better way to look at it is, why am I experiencing internal resistance to doing something? Why do I feel I don't have the ability, the capability, the wherewithal to do this thing that I want to do, but for some reason I don't want to do it at the same time? Certainly if there is a ethical or moral issue that you have with it, that's a whole different story. But really what I'm talking about is, like, we fight ourselves, and I'm talking just people in general. We fight ourselves on all these little decisions, and we find every reason to not do something.
Well, I can't take that job because I don't have an education in that field.
Or I'll never get that job because I'm not
smart enough.
Whatever. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not skilled enough.
How do you know?
And we all kind of know that really the difference between really successful people that have done what we ourselves want to do, the difference between that person and the people that don't accomplish the thing that they want to do, isn't brains, it isn't skill, it isn't the ability, it's the persistence piece.
Right.
They
failed once, they got up and they failed again, and they keep on failing. They try, fail, adjust.
Well,
try, fail, adjust.
It's true.
It's literally true.
They gave themselves the permission to continue doing it, to continue trying, is essentially what the difference is.
Tenacity,
right? Right. But there's all kinds of examples of how this works. We know, and I don't want to disclose too much information about people, but we both know an individual who was in the teaching profession, and he quit that profession, shifted gears, and became a mental health professional, for example. That's not an easy thing to do, and he did it while having a young family,
right?
That's
not risk.
Yeah, that's not easy to do. And there was tons of resistance there, internally, that said, well, I got to worry about my family. I got to worry about, getting a house, all these different things. I got to manage having an income while going to school. And how am I going to manage my internships, And so that's an example that, that individual took steps to make some change.
And today's making a big impact.
Yeah, exactly.
Big impact.
Yep. The one that I think is really worth focusing on is people that are a recovering yes man. I think a lot of us have that issue, and I'm a recovering yes person for a very long time. And really, what is people that are recovering yes people, that say yes to everything because they don't want to get anybody upset, don't want to create conflict. Where does that come from? It comes from, there's the internalized value of, I can't upset anybody, and I don't have enough value that I can't have a differing opinion.
Right.
And so what the recovering yes person or the individual we talked about that went from teaching to become a mental health professional. By the way, if you're a teacher, please don't abandon the teaching profession right now. There's a teacher shortage. I
We-
just want to put that in.
We desperately need you.
Yeah.
You know how badly.
So hopefully that doesn't spark a wave of people leaving the teaching profession. But anyway, really the difference here is that they granted themselves the permission
Right.
to make a change.
Man, just me thinking of potentially starting a new career. And I mean, I'll be 40 next week.
Yeah.
But that petrifies me.
Yeah.
And if there, I mean, and I have a family, that would be really tough.
But to that effect, if there's something you want to accomplish that seems like a really big goal, you're not going to get to that goal overnight, but you just do the next right thing.
It's a marathon
Towards achieving that goal, and we've beat the exercise analogy to death, but you don't wake up one day and decide that you want to be fit and then exercise once and suddenly you're fit. You know what I mean?
But I thought
right
when you build the muscle it's built. Like why would you need to maintain it?
Because we've just talked, John, our body, our mind is adaptable. It adapts to what's being done to it.
Okay. All right. So you got to keep on going to the gym.
Yeah.
Keep on exercising. Okay. All right. Understood.
So let's talk a little bit. I mean, let's keep going with our kind of sad analogy of permission slips. So let's talk about self-signed slips then, I call them, right? How do you give yourself permission? The first thing, it's important to, and again, we're talking about what is causing friction from us from making healthy decisions or from making decisions to change something in our lives, whether it's a big goal we want to achieve or something really small. Okay. What is that? We all kind of have that issue where when we need to do something difficult, there's always that resistance, and we need to identify why that is. So what are some techniques for noticing that internal no? I think a lot of time, and I'm gonna get on a soapbox a little bit. I think a lot of time we waste a lot of time arguing with ourselves internally and analyzing, why am I having a hard time doing this? Why don't I just go do this? I should really go do this. I really want to go do this. Well, why aren't you really doing it?
Do you think we ultimately know? We just don't want to get to that.
I don't think we really do.
Okay.
To be honest with you, I'll argue with you. I don't think we do because we don't take the time to consciously figure that out. I think, to your point, I think we have the knowledge and information internally to know why we're saying no, but in the moment we don't. We just focus on the decision that we're wrestling with and kind of don't think about the roots of that decision, if that makes sense.
Yep, that does.
And so let's talk about some techniques for noticing that internal no. The
what
first
do
one
you
is,
do?
well, as you know,
You're an archiver.
I'm an archiver. I say I'm a journaler. And one journaling prompt that I use is, what would I do if no one were watching? If I didn't care, and this is coming from me as a recovering yes person. So if I didn't have to worry or think about or care about what other people thought, or if other people weren't watching, what would I really do? And that's kind of, journaling about gives yourself permission to think about it differently. And it's kind of amazing when you engage in that exercise. It gives your brain some guardrails or some guidelines as far as some boundaries about how to think about something, but it's also very freeing because it kind of removes the stress of the situation and forces you to be a bit more concrete with it.
So why if no one were watching? Like why is that part of the prompt?
Because if you think back to, if you talk,
meaning like no one was watching, as if like no one truly would care what you do.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
If you were free from the judgment of others, what would you do?
Which in reality we are.
We are, but there's the perception of it.
I know. That's what I'm saying. It's we truly, no one can truly really, I mean, sure, people can, family members can influence us, but really,
Here's another way.
No one can really tell us what to do.
Another way, exactly. Another way to look at it, and this is kind of helpful. You talked a little bit about, remember how we talked a bit before about, how do we know the difference between our own internal value system and a value system imposed on us by others? Another good question to say is, if I didn't care what other people thought, what would I do? And that really taps into the value system of others versus our own value system. It also forces you to wrestle with who you really are as a person internally, right?
Yeah.
But that's another prompt that you can use to kind of do some
I think I
self-exploration.
might have to use that prompt.
Yeah.
I think I could go down quite the rabbit hole with that one.
Yep. The other thing you can kind of pay attention to, and so some of us aren't really journalers and whatnot, but it's also important to, another thing to do is to look at what I call somatic cues. What is a somatic cue? It's just a bodily or a physical response to something. So if you're experiencing tension or hesitation, that's pretty obvious. That's kind of a cue to something going on internally that's important to pay attention to,
Right.
to be aware of. And then you want to figure out, well, why is there that tension? Is it because I perceive somebody is not approving of what I'm doing? I perceive that I need permission to do it. Why is that? And it's important to kind of wrestle with that a little bit.
Sure.
To kind of help resolve it.
That makes sense.
Have you ever heard of learned helplessness before?
I have heard of it, yes.
Yeah. So what's your, putting you on the spot, what do you think learned helplessness is?
Without looking at the notes and with not being the best, admittedly being the best at recalling things.
It's okay. You can mess it up.
I believe learned helplessness is essentially you're just taught. It's kind of like the idea of like you put fleas in a jar, and they can just jump out, but then you put a lid on them. They keep hitting the lid. And they're like, oh, I can't jump this high. If you take the lid off, they'll never jump higher than where the lid was. You dump them out of the jar. They'll never jump any higher for the rest of their life. So basically, you're taught, the way I interpret it is you're taught helplessness. You're taught helplessness, where you're really not.
Correct. That's similar. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of.
You're on the right track.
On the right track a little bit? Okay.
I argue, my argument to most people when they're struggling with doing something or struggling with following through on a goal, it's because they've developed learned helplessness. What is learned helplessness? It's very similar to what you're saying. Is you're talking about the fleas or the insects or whatever you had in the jar. They can jump out very easily. You put the lid on the jar, they keep bumping up against it, and to the point where they've learned that there's a barrier there. They take the lid off and then they never jump any higher. Okay. Learned helplessness for us is we develop this belief that an effort is useless because past attempts to change the situation didn't work.
Oh,
does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody has learned helplessness, they have lost the ability to see value in the small steps along the way, because they don't see that it's as it moving towards a goal.
So failure is actually a step forward.
Yeah. So essentially, let's talk. So what does learned helplessness looks like? And we like to pick on exercise all the time. I'm kind of an exercise nut. So someone with learned helplessness knows they want to get healthy, for example, knows they want to lose weight or they want to train for a marathon or whatever. But the first step in the training plan for a marathon, for example, is to go for a walk. Somebody with learned helplessness would be like, what's the point of going for the walk? Going for a walk's not going to get anything. I'm not running.
Right.
What's the point of doing that? Someone with learned helplessness is seeing that specific walk is not going to do anything to help me to achieve a goal. So why even bother trying?
Oh, okay.
Okay. That's what learned helplessness is.
Right.
The classic experiment of learned helplessness, which would never fly today, was done on dogs. And what happened is dogs would essentially, I'm paraphrasing the study, but they would be given a shock and there was no predictable triggering for the shock. And so the dogs were in the kennel, they were administered an electric shock. And what they found is over time, then at some point in the future, they opened up the door of the kennel and continued to shock the dog, but the dog never left the kennel. And so that's kind of the classic experiment of learned helplessness is they knew they were in a bad situation. They didn't like it, but they still didn't change it because they didn't see the value in it, essentially.
Man, that's sad.
But we do that all the time, right?
Right.
Hypothetically, we do that all the time. We don't do things because we don't see that as achieving the full goal in the moment. And that's learned helplessness, right? Is we've learned that our actions don't amount to anything valuable in that context, and therefore we don't do them. And learned helplessness really holds us back.
Interesting. Okay.
So the reason I bring that up is to counter learned helplessness, there's this concept of behavioral activation. This is kind of where the rubber meets the roads as far as getting permission to do things, getting back, kind of taking some autonomy back to giving yourself permission to work towards things that you want to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
It's this idea of behavioral activation. Well, behavioral activation is another pop culture or pop psychology concept, but I think it does have some relevance here. It's the whole goal is to disrupt the belief that nothing I do matters, nothing I do matters, by scheduling and completing small activities. Okay.
And you did something that mattered right in that moment.
And then the key is tracking the impact. And so the reason it works because a couple things, it forces you to actually do something. And then 2, it forces you to reflect on it. Okay. So what does formal behavioral activation look like? There's several steps. The first one is identify your avoidance pattern. Really, our lack of ability to move forward in life is a lot of times due to our avoidance of it. We avoid change like the plague. It's really fascinating when you look at human behavior. We avoid it.
Think there's some people who actually crave change all the time. Like, do you think there's ever people on the completely opposite spectrum? Like, oh my gosh, I just love chaos.
I suppose there is, but I would argue that the person that craves chaos, like that's their steady state. So I would argue that actually they're not seeking change, they're avoiding change, because for the person that thrives on chaos, the alternative to that is to live a quiet, peaceful life, for example.
Which in and of itself is change.
Which in and of itself is change and is uncomfortable to them. The change is uncomfortable. What we're used to is not.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's why you see a lot of people, like, we always question, well, why is that person staying in that situation that's clearly harmful for them?
Right.
Because it's familiar.
Right.
And what is known,
the
what is
unknown
known is safer than
right.
the unknown, 100% of the time in the human brain. So there's always going to be that resistance.
Right, because at least you know what's coming.
Yeah. Yep. So again, the key the key for that is to identify your avoidance patterns. What am I doing because I think it won't help? What am I not doing because I think it won't help? And again, this is where we kind of miss the forest for the trees. I'm not going to go on that walk because what's the point of going on that walk? It's not going to, in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to matter. Well, maybe so, but if you don't take the walk, you're not going to get to the half marathon.
You're not taking that first step.
Right.
Right.
So so the key is to identify those avoidance patterns. Then next is to create a master list. I call it a master list of values-based activities. So what does that mean? Well, it depends upon what you're wanting to accomplish. If you're wanting to achieve more meaningful relationships, perhaps a value-based activity is texting a friend every day. If the problem you have is that you don't stay in touch with your friends enough, maybe a value-based activity is texting a friend once a day. Well, one text won't fix a relationship.
It's a heck of a lot. It's a heck of a lot more text.
Right.
It's a heck of a lot more text messages than I've sent in the past couple of years.
So, but can you have a long-term healthy, stable relationship on just texting? Well, certainly not. But the whole point is to go down to something really small that you can do without much resistance that kind of moves you towards what you're wanting to accomplish.
Right. Sure.
Another simple action, for example, somebody has organizational problems. Anyway.
What are you talking about? I'm so good at organizational skills. All you gotta do is look at my office.
Right.
Everything is in a place. I can guarantee you everything is in a place.
Everything is in a place. I really think we could have a whole episode on organization, like the genetic component of organization.
I think we should. I kind of need it. Yeah.
I've fought it for years too. But anyway, and it stems from our dad's garage.
It's gonna. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dad.
So my point is, someone struggles with organization, and by the way, I send my wife Jessica can edit this out if it's irrelevant, but I sent a meme to my wife the other day, and that there's two kinds of people in the world. And I send her memes all the time. The first one was of a pristine garage, that had a table, a TV, beautiful cabinetry, empty space, everything's in its place. And the other picture was of a garage with just stuff piled high in the middle. No car can get in. There's no organization. And it says there's two people in life. There's two types of people in life, and it showed just those two pictures.
I would be the latter person if I would not, if it was it's a non-negotiable that our vehicles must fit in the garage. That is a non-negotiable, and I am working hard at getting that garage cleaned out. So, Amanda, it's coming, I promise.
So what my response to that is, why would you want a house for junk when you have these expensive machines sitting outside? Anyway. But my point is, so if someone if someone struggles with organization, like that can be an overwhelming thing for them to accomplish, so rather than focusing on, I'm going to organize the entire house, the entire garage, and my entire storage shed today, well, why don't you just focus on that, tidying that little space, tidying your nightstand. That takes you 5 minutes, and that's a vital chunk. Well, that's not going to organize my whole house. You're right, it's not. But it's moving you towards that. So the whole idea of developing this master list of value-based activities includes those really simple actions that align with the value of, having better relationships, i.e. texting a friend or tidying up a space.
Right.
Does that kind of make sense?
It does.
Once you have that master list, then the third step is then in behavior. Again, we're talking about behavioral activation. So the first step is to identify avoidance patterns. The second step is to create up that master list of value-based activities. And then the third step is to schedule 1 to 2 of those activities every day. Now, the key with these is to start with a very small activity. So again, texting the friend. How long does it take to text somebody? Literally 10 seconds?
Maybe.
Right. Start very small and just plan to do 1 to 2 of those a day. Now, the key that we work on in therapy with people is to not overdo it. This is similar to someone that wants to take up running. You never say, all right, go and run 7 miles. They will fail 100% of the time. But you start with go run around the block 1 time.
Right.
You start really small, and you do that intentionally. You don't overdo it. And so you start with small activities, schedule 1 or 2 of them a day, and that's it.
Is that kind of a thing where you want to do something where it just takes a little bit of time and doesn't wear you out?
Well, it's not overwhelming.
Right, overwhelming.
It's like, okay, I can do that. I think this is stupid, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right, sure.
And so that's the third step, is to schedule 1 to 2 of those activities a day. Then number 4 of behavioral activation that we use is this is where kind of the rubber meets the road, from the standpoint that it forces you to reflect on it. As you rate your mood before you did the activity and after you did the activity. You have to be honest with yourself, because some people are like, well, this is stupid. I don't feel anything about this. Well, that's not really true. And the whole goal with rating your mood before and after is to have this, develop that connection between the cause and effect to your mood.
Right. Sure.
The goal is to kind of build a sense of accomplishment. So that way you kind of break down that resistance that you often experience.
Right.
With those things.
Sure.
And then lastly, which is where the journaling comes in, is reflect on the results. So typically the way we would use behavioral activations, when someone, you'd work with a person in session, they would develop their system of value-based activities that they would do, that they're going to do the next week. Then you would schedule with your therapist 1 to 2 of them a day. And then they would come back in the next session, then they would take the time to reflect on the results. And so you can do that by talking with someone about it. You can do it by journaling about that. And then the whole goal is to kind of build an internal consensus for, these little steps actually do have an impact.
Sounds like I need to do some, I need to work on getting myself some slips.
You do need to give yourself a self-signed slip.
I need to do that. Give myself a chance to try new things and to reflect on them and all that good stuff.
So to kind of wrap this up and do a nice bow, I just want to encourage people to write yourself 1 permission slip this week. Give yourself permission to do 1 thing that you maybe have been avoiding. Do one and take one thing that you've been avoiding, and then write out 1 small step that you can do to work towards that thing you've been avoiding.
Do you have a recent permission slip that you signed for yourself?
Oh no, you're putting me on the spot. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
I think I do know that you have. I know that you have I think your permission slip was. I think I see you acting upon your permission slips. I think maybe you're just doing them without even writing them, because I see you reflecting a lot in your writings and all that kind of stuff. So maybe you're just, it's becoming more automatic for you.
So I guess, thank you for giving me that time to come up with something. But you look at something like this
Anytime.
podcast, for example, and I think you know me probably better than most. Is I tend to have that resistance in general. You know, I'm a very analytical person. I'm a very stoic person.
Right.
And so I'm able to find out, well, all the reasons why something won't work. And
It needs to be done the
yeah.
exact right way. Otherwise, no one's going to pay attention to the podcast.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
And then I was kind of like that. Well,
Let's just go do it.
We have to do it. We just have to start. That's how we're going to get better.
Yeah.
You know.
And so even, it's just an example, even as, and this is
like, we even changed our lighting now.
I know, right? And this is me becoming, I've mentioned to many people, I'm a recovering yes person. Even as I walk down the hall to come here, I'm like, oh geez, what are these people going to think of me going to do this? When the reality is they're too busy working to pay attention to what the heck I'm doing anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I'm always giving myself permission slips to do something despite what other people think. But it starts with really small things, you know?
Right.
Really small things.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I have one last poetic quote to leave people with.
Tell us, Josh.
Authority is something you reclaim quietly. Yeah.
That's a good one, Josh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is a good poetic.
But to that point though,
proverb.
Authority is something you reclaim quietly. We always, and we've talked about people that are overnight successes, regardless. You can talk about celebrities, you can talk about business leaders, you can talk about people that are just very successful in their profession. We see them as overnight success, but what you don't see is all the decisions that they've quietly made to slowly lead themselves in the position that they're in now. And that's what separates the people that feel success in life to those that feel held back most of the time.
So the more you give yourself self-signed permission slips, the more, the greater the chances of a friend or family looking at you someday and going like, how did you get there?
Exactly.
How did you get there? What's your secret? What's your overnight success story? Well, you've been seeing it all these years.
That's right.
You know, you've been seeing it all these years.
Yep.
So, well, awesome. That's really good. That's a really good talk, I think.
Yeah.
I think you have something here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Non-Static Podcast. If you want to keep the conversation going and explore more ways to find peace, focus, and fulfillment, be sure to sign up for the Non-Static newsletter at nonstatic.org. We've got the link for you in the episode description. And if you or someone you care about is struggling with their mental health, we are here to help. You can connect with us anytime at Inspire Services at inspireservicesllc.com. If you found this episode helpful, take a moment to follow, rate, or leave a quick review. It helps more than you know, and it lets us keep bringing you the content you care about the most. Take care, keep moving forward, and as always, enjoy the journey.